Hi everyone, and welcome to my presentation. My name is Dr. Kelly Medellin, and I am from Midwestern State University. And I've been at Midwestern, I guess for the past like 9 years now. And before that, I taught in the public schools. I taught in bilingual kindergarten and bilingual pre-K in Richardson ISD and in Dallas ISD, and enjoyed my time there. And in the university, I love being a university field supervisor for clinical teachers. So I still get to go out and be in the schools, and then I teach bilingual education courses and early childhood courses, and my master's is in bilingual education, and then my doctorate is in early childhood studies, and so those are kind of my focuses when it comes to my research. This is actually my dissertation, and so my first time presenting it here at SERA, so I'm very proud of it, and I hope that you will enjoy getting to learn about my findings, and also, hopefully, if this is something you're interested in doing, can take some of the methodology that I used, and apply it to your own research. So this is the construction of identity through early childhood curriculum, examining picture books from a critical feminist lens. So just to give you some introduction, picture books are written artifacts that convey cultural messages and values about society and help children learn about the world. It's such a huge part of every day in early childhood classrooms in the state of Texas. In the pre-kindergarten guidelines, it actually recommends for a full day program that you're reading at least two picture books to children every day, and so that's quite a bit um, of books of stories that children are getting introduced to each day. And so I kind of wanted to take a look at what these look like in a classroom. And definitely due to current demographic trends, especially here in public schools in Texas, which we are actually now a majority state in our public school system. More than 52% of the public school system students pre-K through 12 are Latinx, and um, then we also have, African American population, Asian population, Muslim race, and so we're much over the tipping point in terms of our public school system. But and so there's really this need for diverse literature in the classroom that represents the identities of all the children in the class. Um, and what I wanted to take a look at was how picture book text and illustrations in early childhood curriculum represent the identity of female characters of color viewed through a critical feminist lens. So I also thought that that was important because I just wanted to take a look and see what was going on, especially taking a look at what's been done in the past. And so there's a lot of studies that really focused on um, which I'll go to the next slide because it's really dealing with my literature review that I'm talking about now. So there are a lot of studies that really focus on gender, a lot of in children's picture books and gender representations, and then there was a lot of studies focused on like multicultural aspects of children's picture books, but not necessarily the two combined. And so that's what I wanted to try and do. But in my literature review, there were several findings that, especially with gender and also with race, that a lot of characters female characters would have either were invisible, there was a lack of agency, and then they were definitely reinforced stereotypes of like princesses and mermaids, and or they were kind of like a quiet mouse, like in the back of the book. But there were some counter narratives in some of the book studies that were done on like multicultural representations in books, where characters actually had voice, shared lived experiences. There were resistance stories to like real things like going on in kids' lives, and then just creating a space for these stories to be shared with children. So my theoretical framework, as I mentioned before, it was really using a marginalized feminist thought brought together by Chicana feminist epistemology and Black feminist epistemology. And I chose to use the theoretical tenets of representation and silencing, mestiza consciousness and intersectionality and lived experience to try and take a look at the books at the particular curriculum that I chose. So with my methodology, I chose books from the High School Preschool Curriculum, which is a TEA-approved curriculum, so our Texas Education Agency, but it's also used in other states. This study took a critical stance on content analysis, so I used critical content analysis and critical visual analysis to take a look at the books from the curriculum. I also I used a Johnson Mathis and Short is where I got the critical analysis from, and then the critical visual analysis I used methods developed by Painter, Martin, and Ensworth. So with the critical visual analysis, this just kind of gives you like an overview with with the graphic organizer here about what that looks like with my critical content analysis and how I chose to conduct this research. And so it goes through exactly what I did. So I decided on a research purpose, my questions, my text. Then I read deeply within the critical theory frame. I selected and read children's texts for analysis. I explored the content of the text. I reread and then read related research studies. I identified theoretical tenets to frame the close reading of the text. And then I examined devices of focalization, power, agency, and closure. And then I conducted close reading, again, of the theoretical tenets, revisited the theory, and then selected passages reflecting tenets in the analysis. And so that's what I did with the text, to analyze the text in the books. And then for the pictures, because pictures are such a huge part of picture books, we can't like discount that, right, and just say, well, this is what the text says. But the pictures that are represented there as well are very important and very crucial. And so I felt that that deserved its own set of analyses. And so I used critical visual analysis, where I focused on focalization, affect, ambience, and graduation, where I looked at the visuals given, whether they were photographs or paintings or drawings of the illustrations that were in the book, and saw whose point of view was being shown, whose story was being told, whose expressions do we see, what are the what is the viewer seeing in terms of like feelings and facial expressions, body movements of the characters, the creation of emotional modes, so use of color and hue and vibrance, and then the attitudinal meanings through the use of illustration. I also took a look at those, and I kept a journal of these responses. And I'm going to show you just an example really quick of what this looks like. Oh, sorry, I did not mean to stop sharing my screen. Sharing that to get out of this. Okay, there we go. So now you can see this is an appendix from my dissertation, and this is what my information look like. So these are the themes identified in the initial close reading. So I've got the book title here, and then some of the different areas that I was looking at: focalization, power, agency, closure, and the memos of just different things that I needed to add. And then when I went back and reread them using the theoretical tenets from Marginalized Feminist Thought, I would like write those in purple, and everything color coded for me helped me out a whole lot. And then I would also, again, do the critical visual analysis, taking a look at focalization, affect, ambience, and graduation. And then I did the same thing where I would read the books, kind of give my initial feelings on it, and then in doing my rereadings of the close readings, I would really take a look at some of those aspects that I felt like really were related to those theoretical tenets, and went along with ambience, affect, focalization, and graduation within the books. And then I found themes related to the theoretical tenets of motherhood, action and agency, and then subjugated knowledge and culture. This is where I actually took out either words from the text or statements or phrases from the text from each of the books, and I separated those out into each of the categories and came up with those. So I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint. There we go. Go back to the slide that we were on. These are the books that I ended up choosing. There were several to choose from. The curriculum itself, like when you purchase it, it doesn't necessarily come with them, so teachers have to choose from different sets. So I took a look at all of the, or the, not necessarily the teacher, but whoever's purchasing the curriculum for the school. And so I took a look at all of the different sets that were offered with the curriculum that people could choose from. And these were all of the books that met my criteria of being my multicultural books that also had a lead female characters. So in the initial close reading, I was pleasantly surprised, contrary to many related studies, which highlighted representations of women as passive and silent. I found that many of the books of the female characters were given voice and agency, so I thought that was good. But this was 11 books out of 300, so it's good that they had good representation, but then it was also like, wait, we need to do so much more. Okay. I had talked a little bit about this when I showed you some of those things and what I was doing, and I don't want to make this too long, so I'm trying to go through and see which pieces that I hadn't discussed. I had talked about how I did my coding process and got to show you a little bit about that. So let me go ahead and get into the themes that I saw and then talk to you all about some of my conclusions. So motherhood is one of the overall kind of big themes that I was able to find. And it really showed that they showed caring mothers spending time with their children, accomplishing tasks and goals, comforting, helpful, so all of these really positive qualities. But many of the mothers in the story were not portrayed as very like complex people. Rather, their identities were largely limited to the responsibility of being a mother. But we kind of know, like in real life, like, hey, we're working, holding down households, like having all of these multiple roles, and that role conflict that is seen in real life, especially for women of color, really was not represented in the books. And so the struggle between conflicting versions of motherhood is somewhat evident in the picture books, but the images of the mothers are positive and problematic at the same time because of what I had just mentioned. Let's see. Action agency. So this was like kind of the opposite. So the women represented in the books were kind of like passive. They were cleaning, doing what their kids said, like doing all of this stuff. But then the young girls in the books were like doing all kinds of activities. They were gardening, hiking, cooking, going on adventures, planting, being leaders, initiators, doers, ongoing, confident, fun, joyful, kind of the opposite of what it was showing for motherhood. So within the books, young girls are making decisions about completing activities. They're taking initiative, and although these positive representation of female characters highlighted in this research indicate a small step in the right direction, much more needs to be done to reach true equality of adequate portrayals of females of color in childhood literature. One critical issue is that the books are offered in separate packages for purchase, and so some of the packages have no books with any multicultural representation at all, and some packages may only have 1 or 2 books with a main female character of color, and so that's like just a huge issue, of course. And then some of the books did have representations of subjugated knowledge and culture. One of my favorite books was I Like My Hair, and it has so much in there related to like Black culture and what the hair and the different hairstyles meant to the little girl in the book. And how some of them made her like connected to her history or made her feel powerful. And there were so much in some of these books that were essential to identity, specific cultural references to like language or food, and the words of multiple main female characters of color who are given a voice to share their likes, loves, ideas, experiences for sure. And all of the books were written from a female perspective. So in some ways, lived experiences of womanhood may be a part of every single one of the book because they were all female authors. They weren't all female of color authors, but those pieces of womanhood were definitely there. And so one of my um, major kind of points in my discussion is that there's this issue of inequity through omission. So an important aspect of a critical study is not only what's seen, but what's unseen. And so what's unseen is that there were 339 books and only 11, that's only 3.2% fit the criteria even just to do this study. So the lack of female representation of characters of color is an ongoing issue, I think. And with little to no representation of women and girls of color, specifically for Latina, Indigenous, mixed race, Middle Eastern, ethnic groups in the sample set, these groups are again pushed to the margins of the classroom. And so where do they get to see themselves in stories? Where do they get to see, wow, okay, I could see myself, being a doctor, being a fighter, or having an adventure like the little girl in the story, or do they have to feel, well, those are only stories, for other people? Um, Also, hegemonic power is the ideology of culture and consciousness, and it's valuing and empowering one group's customs over another. And we don't want to have that either. We want to have everybody's lives and lived experiences and identities represented in the books that we bring into the classroom. And this puts like a lot of pressure and a lot of things happening in classrooms to teachers, right? So if the curriculum's not offering this, teachers are going to have to supplement. And so really, hopefully this will, this and more research like this will lead to education agencies, people that are publishing multicultural literature, to really think about looking at these things and making sure that when we are presenting things to children, that we have like a vast array of all of these wonderful differences that are represented in the classroom. So there's so many possibilities for future research, to take the same methodology and the same sample and everything and maybe look at it using a different lens, like critical race theory or post-colonial theory. It would be really beneficial to complete this research using different samples from different adopted Texas pre-kindergarten curriculums. Or another possibility for future research would also be to analyze the books, from other places, not just curriculums, bestseller lists, other award lists like the Coretta Scott King Award, the Pura Beltre Award, and maybe using the intersectional approach that considers more than one cultural aspect, not just gender and ethnicity. And then for conclusion, past research shows that through underrepresentation and discursive messages, culturally and linguistically diverse students are either excluded from literature altogether or represented in ways that don't really value their modes of being, thinking, and knowing. And that's sad. That's awful. We don't want to see that happen anymore. And so, one of the things that I do in teaching in my classes, something that I can do to try and make this effective, just make people aware, like, hey, there is multicultural literature out there. These are some places where you can find it, and it is important for students to be represented in everything that you bring into the classroom. And so some of the things that I do with my undergraduate students, is try to raise that awareness, because sometimes people don't even really realize, like, oh, I didn't even think about, I have this set of 10 books. There was one book with an African American character, and 8 books were focused on boys, and that was it. And then I had a mermaid book, and oh my gosh, I forgot about all these other cultures, or what about different representations of African American culture, so that I don't just say that, oh, this is kind of a monolithic group and this is the book for them, or that represents that culture, and just really thinking about all of these things critically. And then the books from this sample contained authentic cultural themes, gave voices to female characters of color, but it's so limited, and it reflects only a few of the experiences, and again, these aren't monolithic groups of people, and so it's really important that we give an array of perspectives and lived experiences, um, and can be problematic in a classroom where children's cultural identity and self-esteem are still developing, and students only receive one part of the story, that these cultures claim. And there's really got to just be more books that represent also female characters of color, highlighting variety, complexity, strength, fierceness, and the multiple cultures and possibilities of these non-monolithic groups. Thank you so much for coming to my session today, and I hope you enjoyed hearing about my dissertation.